Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion of the episode, before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Grey's Anatomy Season 1, Episode 7, The Self-Destruct Button. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief summary of what happens within this episode. So Izzy and George find out about Meredith and Derek sleeping together. A man shoots himself in order to get a cool scar. A toddler has half of her brain removed. A teenage girl comes in with a botched surgery complications, and then a man swallows his keys to prevent his girlfriend from leaving. So after rewatching the episode, I rank the episodes against each other. On this channel, we rank on two lists: the mostly objective list, which still has bias and judgment, but otherwise is ranked based on set values, and then the personal ranking list, which is purely emotion and opinion based. So we'll start with our mostly objective rank values. For this episode, I've highlighted those I felt applied. So we have to start with our main relationship development, which is worth a positive 4 points. In this episode, we have Meredith and Derek having become physically intimate together. It starts with them waking up together in the same bed, having a cute little couple moment, and then Derek attempting to sneak out of the house as they haven't come out to everyone in their vicinity as of yet. And we do see that Izzy and George see him leave because they are in the kitchen, and this impacts their behavior towards both Meredith and Dr. Shepard throughout the episode, with Izzy being upset, not so much that Meredith is seeing Shepard, but because she feels like Meredith is throwing away some of the advantages that she has, being respected in the OR due to her mother, going to a good school, etc., etc. Whereas Izzy, she feels like she's always had to fight so hard, having come from a trailer park, having gone to a state school, and she just feels like Meredith is throwing away all of her advantages by seeing and attending. But then at the end of the episode, she realizes that Meredith is pretty much fallen in love with Derek at this point, and her anger and rage at her turns more towards pity, and she calls Meredith a poor thing for being all soft and gooey, just like the chocolate cake that she had made. We also get some main relationship development between Christina and Burke. More so on Christina's side, Christina spends the entire episode feeling sick, thinking that she has the flu. However, in the final scene of the episode, we see her in the bathroom with 2 pregnancy tests, and we know that her and Burke have been physically intimate with each other, and so because it's right at the end of the episode, we don't see the result of those tests, but it leads us to see that there may be the potential for Christina to have become pregnant by Burke. And for those main relationship developments, even though there was development in 2 of the relationships, I'm still counting. I was going to count it just as 4, but I think because it is 2 separate relationships, it should be 4 each. So that will actually bring us up to 8 out of 10 so far. I also found that in this episode, the plot concepts were overall very strong, and strong plot concepts is another 4 out of 10, so that brings us up to 12 out of 10. In this episode, the plots that I felt were pretty strong was we had a man come in who had swallowed his girlfriend keys because he didn't want her to leave him. And they kind of go through drama, like she spends the entire episode scolding him for swallowing her keys to prevent her from leaving. But then when Izzy is removing the keys from his throat, He almost swallows them completely, and in the fear of that, she almost decides to stay the girlfriend. But then Isabel basically, after hearing them being her scolding him the entire episode and realizing that they're not compatible, basically holds out the keys to her and tells her to leave and do them all a favor by leaving. And the girlfriend then does leave. Another strong plot concept that I found in this episode was a man came in to get shot after having gotten shot on purpose to make his tattoo look cooler with the scars. He had a skull tattoo. He had previously had his shoulder shot in one of the skull's eyes, which left a puckered scar to like kind of make it 3D. And so he had himself shot again on the other in the other eye of the skull so that it again would look 3D with the puckered scars. Unfortunately, what he didn't realize is that the stress of being shot, which also ended up cracking one of his ribs and collapsing one of his lungs, and they had to go in and drain the blood so that the lung could inflate again, had aggravated a pre-existing infection with the stress on his body, and that infection was in a new tattoo of a spider that he had had on his calf, and this unfortunately results in him passing away. This death, of course, impacts Alex more so than the others because him and this patient had a lot in common and they had a good rapport going. So losing this patient hit him a little harder, though we don't really see a full impact of it because it is near the end of the episode, but we basically see Alex, who's into fitness to keep himself in shape for his job, on a rowing machine and then getting frustrated and dropping it while he remembers the patient dying, showing that it did in fact impact him. The third one that was also a strong plot concept I felt was that a toddler, a baby toddler came in with basically a constant seizure causing her leg to twitch. Upon getting an MRI, Derek sees that basically half of her brain is dead or dying, and the other half is healthy. And what they decide to do is to remove half of the baby's brain that is dead and dying and seal it off so that it can't impact the healthy part. And because of the patient's age and the brain still being in development, the second half, the healthy half, will be able to compensate for the loss. So she'll be able to lead pretty much a relatively normal life. And of course, otherwise, if it's left alone, she will end up dying. And so they then do the surgery, and George gets kicked out of the surgery when he was originally supposed to be in it because he called into question an anesthesiologist who smelled like alcohol. So Christina ends up coming in to do this surgery, which ends up being a success. And then there are, as always, a few negatives to the episode. One of the like the patient plots that I felt was a little bit weak or just didn't really speak to me was basically there was a teenage girl. She went to Mexico, got a botched stomach staple because her mom was kind of demanding and she thought she was gaining weight because she went up one jean size. In the end, they had to reverse it because she got an infection, an abscess due to it, and she lost some of her bowels, so now she's going to be fighting with malnutrition her entire life. It wasn't overly interesting. The characters weren't overly compelling in this subplot, at least compared to the other patients that they had for this episode. This one kind of fell flat, and that is a -2 points, which brings us to 10. However, there was also some negative messaging and behaviors that occurred within this episode. First of all, we have that Christina decided to come into work despite feeling sick. She works in a hospital. Hospital is bound to have immunocompromised patients. If you are ill, especially with something that's very viral like the flu, you probably don't want to be spreading that to them or try to avoid spreading that to them. And a lot of post-surgery patients usually have an increased risk of infections. So again, you don't really want to be bringing that illness to them. So I think that that was very poor. Like I know Christina is very ambitious, But again, there was not a lot of thought to the patients that could potentially be impacted by her illness when she decided to come in thinking she had the flu. Of course, by the end of the episode, we realize that she, in fact, thinks she might be pregnant instead. But because through most of the episode, she did think she had the flu and was coming to work anyways, and even went to a baby's surgery, like a toddler baby's surgery, while thinking she had the flu, I think that's not great behavior. So definitely worth that -2. There's also the subplot of the one anesthesiologist smelling like alcohol and still showing up to do the job while inebriated, while under the influence, while not at 100%, which does have a negative impact on the little girl patient because because the anesthesiologist ends up falling asleep and not doing his job properly, the little girl starts to wake up while her brain is being removed. Like half her brain is being removed. And he does end up being kicked out of the surgery. But the reason George was kicked out of the surgery was before the surgery even started, bringing up the fact that the anesthesiologist smelled like alcohol and that he was worried about that. And he ended up getting kicked out. And then to prove his words right, the anesthesiologist was in fact under the influence, fell asleep during the surgery, and then he ends up getting kicked out too. So overall, that is a -2 as well, which then brings us to a total objective score for this episode of 8 out of 10. So as a reminder of our mostly objective ranking list so far, in first place we have A Hard Day's Night, in second place No Man's Land, third place Shake Your Groove Thing, fourth place is this episode, which is the self-destruct button, fifth place was If Tomorrow Never Comes, sixth The First Cut is the deepest, and then in seventh we have Winning a Battle, Losing the War. And now we come to our personal ranking, which is purely opinion based. So some of the things that I noticed in this episode, of course, was that with the one subplot that I didn't really like, there was a character, the main character's mother. She was very well put together. She was very thin. She was very beautiful. She was in a power suit, so she was obviously very successful. Whereas the dad was more laid back, more emotionally present than the mother. And throughout the entire episode, the mother is basically disparaging and putting down the daughter, scolding her for her actions without realizing that she most likely is the cause. Meredith, of course, does notice that the mother's probably the main cause. And when she does call them out at the end, the dad does seem to want to step up. And it shows like the dad the entire time is just caring about his daughter, as the mom is caring more about her image and how the daughter makes her look in the situation. And I wanted to call out like their poor behaviors in that dynamic. There's also the fact that during the surgery of the stapled stomach, Meredith gets a pus facial from the stomach's abscess while it's being drained, which is really, really disgusting. I almost got sick. I was like, and then they comment often afterwards when she's walking around after the surgery about how bad it smells. And even just imagining that, I feel sick. So I just was really put off by that part. That's one of the other reasons why I thought it was a very weak portion, is that it made me feel sick. The other main call out that I had for the episode, because overall it was a really good episode, there weren't a lot of critiques that I really had, but one of the other ones that I wanted to call out is that we've seen this as well in other episodes where a less experienced staff member, like an intern, will notice something, will voice a concern, or be too afraid to voice a concern out of fear of repercussions, which of course is very dangerous, at least from the patient perspective. If something is going wrong, if something has been done that shouldn't be, I would want somebody to come forward because as a patient, I would want the best care and I would not want to be put into risk or danger because of behavior not being called out. In this episode, we have George noticing the anesthesiologist has a smell of alcohol and is potentially drinking at work. He bravely decides to tell Shepard and the doctor. However, he chooses the wrong timing in that he does so in the OR as they're preparing for the surgery in front of all the staff, which of course embarrasses and humiliates the anesthesiologist, who, being more senior, demands Shepard do something about the intern, saying that he is completely fine, and Shepard then kicks George out of the surgery, losing George that opportunity because he decided to speak up. However, later on, as I had mentioned earlier, the anesthesiologist, in fact, was not okay, does fall asleep during the surgery. The patient almost wakes up and ends up having to be kicked out of the surgery, which would not have happened had George's concern been treated with the seriousness it should have when he first raised it. Nor should George have had to lose that opportunity for speaking up on behalf of the patient's care by calling out a doctor who was not up for his job because he was drinking. However, that being said as well, at the end of the episode, Derek in fact does approach George and he does in fact apologize for his behavior, saying that he was wrong, that what happened to George that day was wrong, and they shake hands on it. And also Shepard at that point realizes that George and Isabel had in fact seen him leaving the house. But despite having tried the entire episode to really hate Shepard, George ends up saying like he's so hard to hate. Same with like Isabel with Meredith, how she tried to be so angry, but then in the end ends up pitying her because she realizes she's actually like genuinely in love, not using the relationship. But that also adds a little bit of a dramatic subplot in that the entire episode, Izzy is rude to Meredith, is cold to her, calls her out, makes snide comments, gossips with the other interns about it because she's so enraged by Meredith's relationship. And then George, on the other hand, because he likes Meredith, thinks it's Shepard taking advantage of her and that Meredith is the innocent party in this. And so he tries to hate Shepard, but then he sees Shepard interacting with the child, with the toddler, and it's very sweet. He sees like Shepard then apologizes to him at the end, and obviously he's a very difficult person to hate because he is a very likable character. And so in the end, basically that drama ends up resolving itself. Overall, because it was such a good episode and I liked pretty much everything about it, I ranked it 9 out of 10, which brings our season 1 ranking so far on the personal ranking to the self-destruct button actually being in first place. And then in second, we had Shake Your Groove Thing. Third, If Tomorrow Never Comes. Fourth, No Man's Land. Fifth, A Hard Day's Night. Sixth, Winning a Battle, Losing the War. And then in seventh was The First Cut is the Deepest. Which finally brings us to our series ranking so far. This is where we will be comparing the seasons against each other and ranking them based on the episode scores. So with this season, there are 9 episodes, so it's a maximum score of 90, which in the past I've been saying 80 because for whatever reason I thought there were 8 episodes. However, after this episode I checked, there's actually 9 in the first season, according to Netflix where I'm watching this series. So it'll actually be out of 90 going forward. But with this episode, we had our mostly objective score of 8, which brought us to 54 out of 90. And then we had the personal score of 9, which has brought us to 46 out of 90 for this season so far. And with that, we've now rewatched and ranked Grey's Anatomy Season 1, Episode 7, The Self-Destruct Button. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.